All right. Will, do you want to go ahead and get the slideshow opened up?
Yes, I can do that right
Okay.
now.
Oh, and I'll just introduce us.
Okay,
So
great.
for anyone new here, I'm Amber Weevil and I'm the statewide coordinator for the Atlas. Um, so I'm kind of the person that just helps spread information to all of our volunteer coordinators and to all the birders, just to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page with how to participate in the Atlas. And then Will Stolzheimer is joining us tonight also. Will has been working with the Atlas since this past spring. And this summer he worked as the crew leader for our hired point count crew. And he did point counts all over the place too. He was all over the state. And since then, he's been helping. He's been doing some writing and doing some GIS work and a variety of things for the Atlas. So he's helping out with this presentation tonight. So we're going to do a little overview of the Winter Atlas, and we will cover just a little bit of Atlas basics in case we do have new folks here tonight. And then we're hoping to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you think of questions as we're going along and you want to go ahead and type them in the chat, you can do that and we can read those at the end, or at the end if you want to just jump in and ask your questions, that's great too. All right, next slide. All right, so just a really basic overview of what the Atlas is. The Atlas is basically a project and effort done mostly by volunteer birders to document where birds are across the state, where our species in Pennsylvania are found and how abundant they are. And the data collection for the project takes about 5 years. And in Pennsylvania, we're trying to repeat it every 20 years. So this is our third atlas. The first one was done in the 1980s and the second in the early 2000s. And what's really cool about the atlas is when you can repeat them, then you can begin to create really cool maps, looking at how ranges are changing and get a better sense of what's going on with birds in Pennsylvania. And the data that we collect in the atlas, it's done at a really fine scale. So it ties in really nicely with all sorts of other bird projects. So you can kind of get pictures of what's going on with birds at a really fine scale across the whole state, and even broader than that. Historically, atlases have focused just on breeding birds. But increasingly, winter atlases are being done. So this is our first winter atlas, and Pennsylvania will be, to my knowledge, the 5th state in the US to conduct a winter atlas. So that's really exciting. The winter atlas will run from December through February, so it's launching December 1st. And it will go for 5 seasons. So the atlas, the entire atlas will wrap up at the end of February 2029 when that winter season ends. Yeah, okay. And one quick update before we move into talking more about the Winter Atlas. So this is kind of an update for anyone out there who is a principal atlaser, which means that you're covering a block, which I guess we'll get into for anyone who's new. But so if you're a principal atlaser or you've otherwise been doing a lot of atlasing in specific locations, we do now have the ability to mark blocks complete in eBird. So you can see on this map, this is an effort map showing the number of coded species per block. So you can kind of see like the orange and red areas are where we've had a lot of coverage, a lot of species are coded. And then like green and blue blocks have less coverage. And then there are open areas where we haven't had any atlasing yet. And then those black squares are our blocks that have been marked complete. I do know we have more complete blocks than this. They just maybe haven't been assessed or that information hasn't been passed on to me yet. But anyway, this is just to let you all know that this is a possibility. So if you do feel really confident that you have completed your block, you can go ahead and let your county coordinator know. They'll take a look at things, and if they agree with that, they'll pass that on to me. If you aren't quite sure yet, you might want to hold off because we will be doing a big data review over the next couple months. And things could change if you've coded things a little too early or anything like that. So if you aren't quite sure, maybe hold off. But that is an option now, just so people are making sure people are checking out their blocks. All right, and now we're gonna jump into, I guess, back into the Winter Atlas. We're really excited about the Winter Atlas. This part of the Pennsylvania Bird Atlas, the winter surveys, are very simplified relative to the Breeding Atlas. So if you've been participating in the Breeding Atlas, or if you were thinking about participating in the Breeding Atlas, and you saw lots of guidelines, you saw this information about breeding codes and breeding dates, that was definitely a little bit overwhelming, I think, for people brand new coming to the Atlas. It's a lot of information to take in a short time. So if you found that overwhelming at all, I hope that you'll see what's going on with the Winter Atlas and give the Winter Atlas a try. Because you don't really, for the most part, don't have to worry about breeding codes and dates. It's just going out and surveying birds December through February. We do have a few guidelines, which we're going to talk about, but for the most part, it's very simple. And now I'm going to hand things over to Will for a bit.
Great. Thanks, Amber. So yeah, just to get us started, because the Atlas is right around the corner now. We've got only a few more weeks till December 1st. So I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully all you volunteers are really interested in getting started. But first off, what is the point? Winter, I mean, primarily most people think of an atlas when they think of breeding birds and they think of population monitoring. And those sorts of things don't really stand out for the winter period, but it's actually a really, really critical time period for most bird species. Potentially, there's less coverage in the winter, especially in places where we have seasonality and it gets cold. We have a lot of fair weather birders and maybe migratory humans that don't really participate in a lot of winter birding. But birds are highly seasonal. So in the winter, we may expect to have a lot of different species that we wouldn't see different parts of the year. So you may think of certain duck species that may fill our water bodies in the winter, as well as maybe eruptive winter finches. These birds are all struggling significantly in the winter as there's really low amounts of energy and resources out in the world at that time of year. So they can face a potential for high mortality. So it certainly does play into breeding productivity. If you get significant amounts of die-off in certain species during the winter, you'll obviously expect that their breeding populations will not be as strong. So it's a really important time to take data, and we don't have any baseline here in Pennsylvania. So that's our goal, is to establish that. And so, like I said, we're trying to provide current information on winter birds and their distributions. Those things may differ from year to year, and so we want to try and identify some patterns that we can recognize within that, potentially things related to weather, as far as snow or ice in water bodies, or potentially things that are a little bit more subtle, like cone crop variation, or winter fruit variation. Those sorts of things have a big impact on the types of species that we'll see here in Pennsylvania in the winter. And then lastly, we're trying to identify priority winter habitats, because like anything in conservation, if you want to protect a species, you have to start by gathering information on where that species exists and what you can do to try to protect the habitats and the places where it lives. And that's typically the strongest way that we can protect the species that we are looking to provide shelter. So some key points, it's going to be pretty similar to the Breeding Atlas in a lot of different ways. Amber already kind of touched on that, that a lot of it will be similar, but we won't be necessarily using breeding codes all that often. There's a lot of information on our PA Atlas eBird portal, so please check that out. There will be information in the handbook and other survey information. But we just want to start off with the basics here. We'll be collecting all our data through the PA Atlas portal, similar to what we're doing in the summer. So you would have to join that Atlas portal in either eBird online where you're submitting your data or in the mobile app. And then we'll still be observing our block boundaries. So as you get close to a block boundary, if you're using the eBird mobile app, you'll be notified about it. Otherwise, you'll have to do a bit of research about where you're supposed to be birding if you're trying to bird in a specific block. And you'll have to change your checklists accordingly based on those block boundaries. So really, those are the biggest hurdles to our winter atlas. So generally, with a little bit of effort, it's pretty easy to just jump right into this atlas. So you can see here our Atlas portal homepage. You know that you're in the Atlas portal because of up here in the top corner, it says Pennsylvania Bird Atlas rather than just eBird. That's what it would say if you're on the eBird core eBird portal. But as long as you see Pennsylvania Bird Atlas, you know you're in the right place. And if you're looking to submit data online, you would just click this Submit tab and proceed as you usually would outside of the Atlas portal. Another thing that we wanted to note is that there has been some reshuffling of where we have certain resources on the Atlas portal. And most of the documents that you may be looking for on a day-to-day are now going to be under this Participate tab. I'm not sure if you guys can see my cursor, but I'm hovering it over right here. So right now, you'll probably be looking at this Participate tab as well as this Winter Atlas tab. Those are where all the relevant information about what we're doing and what's coming up will be, as well as things like the recent Atlas news that we'll be publishing certain things like this town hall that you've all found. So you must have some experience with this, I'd hope. Okay, and so here are some shots of the eBird mobile app. Many of you may already be familiar with this, but it's a very useful tool for those who find it difficult to keep paper data like myself. I find it very simple to just open up my app, track a checklist on my phone and walk around. But you can obviously do it either way. Take note in the top corner here, it has your checklist time and your checklist distance. These are two critical points of the atlas. We're trying to keep our checklist times to around an hour or less, preferably, and our checklist distances to around a mile or less. That's just due to the fact that it's a lot easier to analyze data and spatial patterns when we have more concise data to work with. A checklist where you travel from corner to corner in a block, but stay within the block boundary still might be pretty difficult to untangle where a bird is actually existing. So for our sake and for the data analysis portion of the atlas, it is really helpful to try and keep your checklists concise and very spatially accurate. Another thing to note is that if you click on this little pinpoint here, it will show you your location, and that's another good way to analyze your block borders. You'll be able to select the location that you're birding, make sure that always when you put a point down that it is representative of the block that you were birding in. Sometimes it will try to bind you to a hotspot that may be just outside of your block. If that's the case, we'd prefer that you use a personal location rather than a hotspot. Okay, so data collection. There's a few finer points to the data collection of the Winter Atlas that we'll get into a little further down the line. But our goal in general is to cover data in all of the priority blocks. We know that it will be more difficult to get coverage for the Winter Atlas. It's just a byproduct of being maybe a less enjoyable time to bird based on weather conditions. And so there may be less involvement. We're understanding of that, but our goal is to collect data in all of the priority blocks, which are the southeast blocks in the grid pattern that we have set up. That doesn't mean that data from outside of priority blocks is unimportant. It's still certainly important and it will be analyzed. It will be useful for the atlas, especially if there's key habitats like big lakes or different roosts for certain birds, we would encourage you to bird those areas as well. But in general, we will be tracking block completion only in priority blocks, and I'll get more into what that means a little later. But we will be collecting data of all the different general types in eBird. There are a few others that are a bit more niche, but in general, you'll either be traveling, you'll be stationary, or you'll be doing an incidental list when you observe a raptor on your drive to work or something of the sort. So all three of those data types are very useful for us and are valuable, and you should submit them to the atlas. So like I mentioned, we are tracking block completion in priority blocks. Part of your block completion goals will be timed 1 hour surveys. So we're looking to have 2 of these per season in each priority block that are within season. I'll explain more about that in a little bit, but in general, we're going to want to have 1 of your timed surveys in the early season, so from the start of December to the middle of January, and 1 of your surveys in the late season, so past the middle of January to the end of February. We're going to be using them to estimate abundance of species, identify habitat patches within your block, so you can go on a map and look at your block from an overview perspective and look for different habitat types like grassland or forest or lakes or riparian areas. And we would hope that you would set up your timed surveys to try and cover all of those different habitats. We're going to want people to be moving at a normal birding speed, whatever that means for them, on foot, not in a car, to keep it consistent. And you would be traveling for 1 hour, covering as much ground as you can in that time, moving at a normal birding pace. So the distance you cover is not overly important. It's more that you're traveling for 1 hour and you're observing as many different habitats as you can. We're going to ask that you avoid the hours 1 hour after dawn and 1 hour before dusk, as these are important roosting times for certain species. You may get large inflated counts of blackbirds that are moving into cattail marshes at these times, or sparrows moving into dense scrub. So in order to not inflate our abundance numbers, we're going to ask that these counts be taking place outside of those hours. So this is the priority block system. Maybe some of you are familiar with the Pennsylvania Bird Atlas map tool. I encourage you to go check that out. We've made some updates related to the Winter Atlas in that tool. But what you can see here is that each Atlas block, priority Atlas block, is assigned to a specific winter season. So the ones highlighted in bold are assigned to the 24-25 season. And it goes on an alternating pattern, so alternating both vertically and horizontally. We are looking to complete our Atlas blocks during the season that it is labeled in order to try to spread out effort. And this is really important in the winter to have this done systematically because of the things I mentioned, like snow cover and icing of lakes or eruptive birds. There will be different numbers of species in different years. So in order to try and understand the abundance at a finer scale, we want to try and systemize the way we collect the data in such a way that it will be representative of the entire state, not specifically at that block. So if 1 year we don't have a lot of moving winter finches, you may find that these priority blocks for the 24-25 season don't show many winter finches, but next season we may get a big eruption. So all of these blocks on the same latitude will show higher numbers. And that will help us understand whether the seasonality or different variables that could impact those species being present were at play, or whether it just is to do with the habitat, the latitude, the part of the state, so on and so forth. So this is the system we've devised. If you are a principal atlaser of a priority block, we would ask that you take a look at the map tool and figure out what season your priority block is meant to be surveyed. And then we will ask that you can complete these specific targets. So a minimum of 6 hours across the winter season, which is not a hugely significant amount of time. You can probably cover that in a handful of surveys. And that would also include your 1 hour surveys. So 2 of them, one in the early season, one in the late season. And we would ask that these 2 surveys be done in different locations. And we would really prefer at least one nocturnal survey over that period, as the winter is a really important time of year for certain species like owls that are beginning to pair. Some important things to keep in mind while you're winter atlasing is that it's pretty simple to complete your blocks. It's only 6 hours, and technically you could do that over 2 visits. You could do your surveys and then continue to bird for a few hours and complete your blocks in only a handful of visits. There's really not that many priority blocks. There's only 817 across the state total, and that's roughly 3 to 5 per county each winter, each season. So it's a very manageable goal, and I'm sure with all of your hard work, we can absolutely achieve that. So like I mentioned before, non-priority blocks will not be tracked for their completion, but the data are still important. So if you know of specific areas that have a tendency to draw in really interesting winter birds, we would hope that you would still bird these locations and not just ignore them because the atlas is going on and you have to get to a priority block. It's still important to gather that data, and for certain species that are very habitat specific, if they are not in a priority block, we still would like to know about them for the sake of the atlas. So definitely don't ignore all your other blocks and just push for priority blocks. It's still important to gather data all throughout the state. Okay, I will hand it back over to Amber now to talk about our water body surveys.
All right, so this is kind of the last big winter atlas thing to talk about. So we're planning surveys of water bodies, primarily lakes, also potentially like wetlands and nice river access points where birds tend to congregate in the winter. So the purpose of this is to try to capture some pretty specific information on water birds in Pennsylvania. That's largely going to be waterfowl, ducks and geese, and swans, and kind of, you know, see what parts of the state they're using and how they're moving through the state or around the state as winter progresses and between different winter seasons. And to do this, we need to get an entire count of the birds on a water body at a specific time. But that doesn't mesh up really well with our with how we count birds for the atlas, because you know we count birds at the block level. And you know you're not supposed to count birds that are in a different block, and so you know that's a little bit difficult with some of our large water bodies. So here's an example of bald eagle, at the reservoir at Bald Eagle State Park, and it's in multiple blocks, as you can see here. And so we're kind of we're setting up a scheme here that kind of works for both of these. So you can go to the next slide, Will. So if you are surveying a smaller water body that's in a single block, or it might cross blocks, but it's still small enough that you can kind of see the whole thing or most of it, one person can survey that, and you do one checklist if it's all in one block. You might have to do 2 checklists if it's in 2 blocks. Even if one observer has to move a little bit, if they can do that quickly, like survey most of it from one access point or vantage point, I should say, and then, you know, move to another vantage point to get that other little bit that they couldn't see. You know, if you can do that pretty quickly and get have a good idea that you have not double counted any birds, because that's the big thing here, is not double counting anything. then that's fine. But for a larger water body, like you just saw with the reservoir, Bald Eagle, and lots of other lakes around the state, what we are probably going to need is to have a few observers coordinate efforts so they're counting at the same time. So they're each stationing themselves at different vantage points, and they have planned ahead of time who's covering what. And so you're only counting birds in your block or your 2 blocks or whatever. And this other person is covering this area. And so you know that, and so you're not counting birds that, you know, someone else is counting. So when that's the case, each person would do their own checklist or potentially a couple checklists, if they're doing more than 1 block. And then those would all be combined into a trip report that whoever has coordinated this survey has set up. And ideally, how this will work, what would produce the most useful data for the atlas is if these surveys can be repeated at least twice each season. So like once in that early winter period and once in that late winter period. If they can be repeated more time, excuse me, more times than that, that's great. But that's obviously asking a lot of people. And in some cases, water bodies won't remain open for long enough. So, you know, it might not be possible in those cases as well. We're still kind of figuring out the details on this because it is a little bit complicated to try to coordinate this. And we are working on a list of water bodies, like the larger water bodies that will require some coordination between multiple people. But basically, you know, if you're interested in participating in this, and you know that there would be places in your county or your region, or wherever you want to travel to across the state to help out, I would recommend getting a hold of your county coordinators, the county coordinators or regional coordinators in those places, and maybe just, you know, letting them know that you're interested in helping out. We're going to have to kind of work out that system for this first season, I think. But we'll definitely be putting more information about this on the website and kind of spreading the word about it more. All right, well. All right, so, oh, and actually, so Allie asked, what if it's a river? So, I think the plan with rivers will be like, if you want to just survey from a single vantage point, like, a boat access or something like a designated spot, and just do what you can see from that one spot. We talked about trying to define like river stretches to do. That seems pretty complicated, and also like with a lot of rivers, there are not, you know, you'd identify a stretch, but you wouldn't be able to access all of it. So I think just doing a single point, and so that way one person can do it, you can do it as often as you want. And I think that will be the easiest way to handle rivers. Okay, so to kind of wrap all of that up, I talked in the beginning about how the Winter Atlas, you know, this is like a gentler learning curve for birders who are new to the Atlas or even new to birding. And so I see the Winter Atlas as having these different levels at which people can participate and different ways at which they can participate. So anyone who's out there atlasing can contribute data from anywhere. Like Will said, we'll be using data from all blocks. And you know, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're out in some natural habitat or if you're counting birds at your feeder. That's all really valuable data. And likewise, if you are contributing to a Christmas bird count or some other winter bird community science effort, it's going to be pretty simple, I think, for the most part, to contribute that data to the Winter Atlas at the same time. And there are some guidelines in the back of the winter handbook about how to do that. So I think, you know, I'm hoping we can pull in a lot of people that way. So please keep spreading the word about this to your birding friends. If you know people who haven't gotten sucked into the Atlas yet. And then for people who have already been atlasing, for principal atlasers in particular, you know, for principal atlasers, we're asking again that you try to cover your priority blocks, particularly in those assigned seasons. But if you want to and are able to do those timed surveys and other birding in your priority blocks in other seasons, that's great. Um, uh, yeah, and we do, we recognize that sometimes people are traveling during the winter. So if you're not around, if you're not going to be around in the season that your block is assigned to, you do need to communicate with the county coordinator about that so we can try to find a backup person. And then, if you are someone who has the ability to travel a bit around the state and has time, we are going to have a lot of blocks that we don't have principal atlasers for that we'll need people to step up and cover those blocks. And then in all other blocks, that aren't priority blocks, we still want all that data. So if you can do any of those 1-hour surveys and participate in the water body surveys in those other places, that's all great. So again, there are these different levels at which you can participate and kind of do as much or as little as you want. Yeah, and someone also just asked, should the water body surveys be conducted during each block's assigned season? We are hoping to do the water body surveys every season. I recognize that in some places that might not be feasible, just if there are a lot fewer birders around, but definitely in the more, any water bodies that are closer to more populated parts of the state, there should be plenty of people to help do those each season. And another question, would we be looking for as many 1-hour surveys that we can get in the priority blocks? You can definitely do as many as you want. I would say, like, make sure you get your 2 in, the one in the early winter and the one in the late winter. And then beyond that, do more in the block, but also if you're going to be birding a lot, I would consider spreading that effort out a little bit and hitting up other blocks, whether that's other priority blocks or other non-priority blocks. Okay, I think I'm gonna save the rest of the questions for in a minute. Go to the next slide, Will. All right, and then I just wanted to again put a plug in for the Pennsylvania Atlas of Life project. So if you haven't heard of this yet, this is an iNaturalist project that's running alongside the Bird Atlas. So just like the Bird Atlas is trying to fill in gaps in data for birds across the state, the Atlas of Life project is doing the same thing with all taxa. So the idea is that as we have birders going out everywhere, and most of them have their phones on them. Many of you already have the iNaturalist app or the Seek app, and you're being very observant. So you're noticing all these other things. So you can submit those to iNaturalist. And we're collecting a lot of data this way. I'm certain that many of the people that are participating in this don't know that they're participating because anything submitted to iNaturalist in Pennsylvania during this time period is automatically feeding into this project, unlike the Bird Atlas. So you can see here, this is just updated this morning. We have nearly 616,000 observations, over 12,000 species reported, over 25,000 observers, which is really cool. And this is year round. So, it's going to be probably a little slower during the winter, but as you're out there, you might see fungi in February, depending on where you are in the state. There will be potentially amphibians or spring ephemerals, other plants throughout the winter. So keep submitting those things to iNaturalist. This is another great way to participate in community science while we're out there already.
If I could just point out one more thing,
Mhm.
is that birds make up only a very small portion of the amount of species that have been identified. So any of you who take photos of birds or sound recordings of birds, all of those can be uploaded to iNaturalist as well as to eBird. It's a separate process, and we won't go into that here, but it's relatively simple, and I would encourage you to look into it because birds are typically undersampled on iNaturalist just because of how prominent eBird is for that sort of data.
Although I do think that the number one for this project, the number one reported species, I think, is robin. So
That makes sense.
but they're everywhere. So
for ours too. Yeah.
All right. Yep, and then just to wrap things up, so here's the website that Will showed the screenshot of ebird.org/atlas PA. So that will get you to the web page, the homepage for the Pennsylvania Bird Atlas portal. And that's where you can find the handbook and all sorts of other information, and you can find the contact information for all of our county coordinators. So if you're new, you want to go on there and find out who your county coordinator is, and you can reach out to them for more information. There's an email address to get a hold of me there. And then, we're on Facebook and Instagram, PA Bird Atlas. On Facebook, we also have the PA Bird Atlas discussion page, which is a really great place to ask questions. And we have a Discord channel. Yeah, please reach out with questions. All right, I think we can stop sharing this, Will. And I'm gonna look back through these questions. All right, so if you've already signed up to be a principal atlaser, would you have the same block for winter? Yeah, that's the plan. So as long as you're around during the winter, we do hope that you'll be able to cover the winter block, or cover the block during the winter, I should say. If not, reach out to your county coordinator and we'll find another person to cover it. And then if you're a principal atlaser and it's not a priority block, if you want to, go ahead and follow that priority block criteria to do the block, go for it. That's going to be really useful data. You just don't need to, like, we won't be marking the block as complete, so you don't need to like let the county coordinator know that you've completed it or anything like that. If you do have priority blocks around you that are in their assigned season that don't have principal atlasers, you might check in with county coordinator and see if you could cover those instead. If you're limited in how much you can do, then I would first make sure that priority blocks are covered, and then do whatever you want in non-priority blocks or whatever you're able to do. All right, so do you need to indicate when a checklist is for one of those official timed 1-hour surveys? No, you do not. It works a little bit differently than the point counts during the breeding season. So if you're familiar with that, you know that you were supposed to give those a specific name and share them. That was a very specific protocol. And turns out, because I've looked through the eBird data now, it turns out there are tons and tons of checklists in eBird that are 6 minutes long, but that doesn't mean that they were one of those point counts, right? So that was important for me to be able to distinguish those checklists. These 1-hour surveys are a little bit looser in how they're done. So really, as long as it's a 1-hour long checklist and it's a traveling checklist, we'll be able to use it. And if it's submitted through the Atlas portal, we're assuming that it's within one block. So you don't need to name those or submit them a certain way. Or sorry, I should say like share them like the way you did with the point count checklists. At the state borders, there are some very small blocks, so doing more than one 1-hour survey may not be possible. I think that's fine. We'll definitely have to adjust for like some of those really small block slivers, since the blocks don't align with the state boundaries. So I think probably 1 hour, or you might, in that case, if you do 2 of the 1-hour surveys, you would maybe do it in the same location. We'll probably figure that out as we go along. Okay, yeah, this is a good question. So when you're looking at the block information in eBird, it gives you, you can see the number of hours the block has been birded. How can we tell if a block received its 6 hours specifically during December through February? So that is one of the downsides of doing this in eBird at this point, because winter atlases are so uncommon. The eBird sort of the system they have set up for Atlas portals is only geared toward breeding atlases. So there's no way for us to really track things separately for the winter atlas in eBird. You can filter, so you can look at hours. I think you can just do it on the effort map where you see the whole state, but you can filter by month. So I think you could get some information that way, but really the most important thing to do here will be, like, if you're asking about your own block, you just want to keep track of that on your own. And then we will be able to mark those blocks complete in the Atlas map tool, which Will showed, like where you sign up to be principal atlaser. So I think this one is going to be a little more analog than how we track things for the breeding atlas.
Yeah, if I could add on,
Yes, please.
I think the simplest way to probably track your effort hours, and maybe actually I could just share my screen and give like a really quick demonstration here. So I do have the Atlas effort map open. So I'm assuming everybody can see my screen here.
Yep.
What I'm looking at here is the Atlas effort map tracking diurnal effort hours. And here next to the diurnal effort hours, you can see the date. It's currently set to all months. But if I were to set it to January, because our Atlas did technically begin at the start of January last season, you can see that certain blocks will have data, and you can measure the diurnal effort hours from a single month. So by looking after this season at your effort hours for December and then January and February, it's going to be possible to know whether you've hit the effort hours. The difficulty arises when it comes to you don't know whether all of those have come from one season. So if you're a principal atlaser, it may be a smart thing to go and look at your block, see if you have any effort hours from January or February already, and take note of that, write it down somewhere so that after the season is over, you can subtract that from the new level and understand exactly how many hours you've put into your block in that season. I think personally, that's probably the easiest way to do it right now, is just to observe now, take note, and figure it out later.
Yeah, and then so then, like, in terms of like at a broader scale, seeing what's been completed, like I said, we will be like at the end of this first winter season, so like in early March, we'll be making sure we know which ones that were assigned to this season got completed. We'll be marking those complete in the map tool. And I'm sure we'll have, some that got missed or whatever. So we need to make a decision about if we're going to try to do those the second year or if those will get pushed to the last year. But anyway, you will be able to go in then and see what got missed that way. Oh yeah, and someone says in Maine we had a winter map that was updated weekly, so we may get to that point. We haven't had time to create anything that that complex yet. But that may happen.
That'll be a fun project, fun GIS project.
All right, I think I hit all those questions. Any other questions? Okay, and then in Maine, there was a Google group for the hardcore winter birders. Yeah, to share their itineraries.
These are our goals moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's a little hard to like predict some of these things, some of the needs ahead of time. So as we move forward, we'll try to adapt and figure out what works best for our Pennsylvania birders and for our goals for the Winter Atlas. Okay, are the water body protocols now complete? So at this point, the protocol that is in the handbook is complete up to this point. I think we'll have to see how things go starting out, and things could be, I don't think anything major will be adjusted. I may like just fine tune the instructions for it to make it clearer for people. But yeah, it's essentially complete. Um, so that is correct. There are no specific goals for number of species recorded. So if you have participated in the breeding atlas, you know that you're supposed to, like if you're trying to complete a block, you're supposed to look at the number of species that were reported breeding in the block in the previous atlases and try to get to a similar number. We don't have anything like that for the winter atlas. First off, it's very difficult. It would be very difficult to try to come up with a number like that, and it would be really variable across the state. And with eruptive species and everything, that could be difficult. So yeah, the completion is simpler for the winter atlas. It's really just hitting those time goals, and then like 2 visits and at least 2 of those 1 hour surveys. Okay, and then Core in the chat, added a link to the PA Birds Discord server. So there are a bunch of channels in there, and there's one for the PA Bird Atlas. That's another really nice discussion place. During the breeding season, people would just jump on and ask all sorts of questions, share pictures, like share cool stories, and get cheers from everyone. So it's pretty fun. It is okay to report feeder birds. Yeah, for the winter atlas.
Yeah, and as far as CBC and Winter Raptor Survey, CBC, as long as you're willing to take note of block borders, I think should be a pretty simple transition to the Winter Atlas. The Raptor survey potentially will be more challenging as you're typically covering large distances. But in that case, that's an example where incidental or incomplete checklists can be really useful. So just pinpoint location checklists for where you've seen each of the birds might be the easiest way to transition that data for the atlas.
Yeah, and I think like definitely scope out your route ahead of time, like where it is in relation to block boundaries. And it may fall largely within one, like a small number of blocks. So if you do want to do full checklists, you may not have that many different checklists to do. I think some winter raptor surveyors do that already too. So that might be something that people kind of already are pretty used to doing. Just have to split those checklists up a little more. Okay, do people feel good about the winter atlas? Are people excited?
Sounds like a resounding yes to me.
One person is excited. I got a little icon. Okay. Okay, it doesn't seem like there are. Okay, yay, yeehaw. Okay, thank you for joining, everyone. Please do reach out to me or to county coordinators or regional coordinators with questions, and we're continuing to develop some more resources and things for the Winter Atlas. So we'll be putting more out as we go along and fine tuning things as we go. But we're really excited. Keep inviting your birding friends, especially if they are e-birders who are not participating in the Atlas, because the Winter Atlas will be so easy for them. There'll be very few, things for them to have to think about. Okay, oh, I see one more question. Can nocturnal surveys be readily shared between breeding and winter atlases? Yeah, I think so. Depending on what species you get, but like sort of your owl nocturnal survey for the I guess it depends.
I think that we may not want it to be your only nocturnal survey
Yeah,
for our breeding bird
definitely.
atlas. Um, Potentially it would be a good opportunity for things like great horned owl or early screech owls towards the end of the season. Um, but there are still a number of nocturnal species that won't be within breeding dates until after the winter atlas is over. So we did provide guidelines as to 2 nocturnal surveys for the summer atlas, and we're still hoping that you would do that. If you were to have 2 that were just in the winter atlasing period, that may not sufficiently give us information about what nocturnal species may be present in your block. So I think we would advise that you try to split your data between both the winter atlas for nocturnal birds such as great horned owls and so on, and the summer atlas later in the year, potentially in May or something, where more of our summer breeding species will be active.
Yeah, but if you did get owls during winter surveys, and especially if you have breeding evidence for them, I think that would cover, you know, those species for the breeding atlas. And so then you just want to try to do that one other nocturnal survey in June-ish probably. Okay, great. We will wrap up. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Happy birding. See you all later.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.